Good morning. Am I coming through? I figured out as I was trying to get this microphone on that wearing a t-shirt isn't a good idea. So maybe it'll come through. How's everyone? It's good to be a child of God, isn't it? What else would we want to be? I was encouraged this morning during worship. Appreciate the worship team leading up here and helping guide our thoughts and our heart towards God and His ways and who He is. Worship Him for who He is. I was especially noticing the song Above All Else. How God is above everything, literally everything. He is above all else, and yet He was humble. He humbled Himself. Jesus humbled Himself, came down to this earth and came to the worst and darkest place on this earth. He was willing to do that for us. And there's a connection, I feel like, that we can have with Him because we sometimes feel like things are hard, just like was talked about. Things get hard and we're in seemingly the darkest place on earth. And we can know that Jesus was there as well. He was also at the darkest place. And He felt heaviness. He felt darkness. And so He knows. He doesn't just know how that feels, but He is the answer to it. And He brings light to that dark place. And it sometimes may take a little bit of time and a little bit of processing and a little bit of a journey, but there is always light where Jesus is. So when it feels dark, Jesus brings light. So hold on to Him. This morning I want to talk about identity. What's identity? What is your identity and my identity and our identity? What is that? What does identity mean? What's the definition, someone? What happens when there's identity theft? Steal your, yeah. Steal stuff that's very close to you, that identifies you, and they try to become you. That's not possible, by the way. Nobody else can become you. They just steal some data, is what they do. So that's really beside the point. Identity theft is not what we're talking about. But identity is something that we are, right? It is what we are known as. Either what somebody else knows us as, or what we ourselves think of ourselves and know ourselves and accept as who we are, or it's who God says you are. There's kind of three different, potentially different identities that we have. And so things like your name is an easy one, right? The name that you carry through life. For me, my parents named me Delbert, and it's kind of been an attachment that I've received into myself, and I've known myself that way, and other people have known me that way by that little two-syllable word, Delbert. That's who I am. And you all carry some sort of name like that with you. There's identity that you carry in your personality, in your characteristics. In a lot of different ways, we can kind of identify ourselves or identify each other as. God, as our Creator, has the ultimate authority to identify us. The rest of us, we have a faulty or an imperfect view of ourselves and of each other. We do recognize things, and generally we're probably at least partially right, but ultimately God is the one that can say, you are such and such. And why is that?
He's the creator.
He happens to be the one that made each one of us. So if he designs us, he creates us, and he puts us into the world with a whole lot of intentionality and thought and design and engineering, then he has the right to say what we are, right? So let's keep that in mind, I guess, as we go through this message and as we go through life. That ultimately it's God who identifies us. And if he says things about us, let's embrace that. Let's put high importance on what he says we are.
Amen.
So more specifically, I guess, that's kind of what identity is. And we just talked about our individual identity. What I want to more specifically talk about this morning is group identity. We can also have identity as groups of people. Whether we're a family in our home, we have an identity as a family. Whether it's at our workplace, we have an identity at our work. A close synonym of the identity I'm talking about is culture. We could kind of name it culture, but in this case, identity fits better because identity is who you are. And a culture is more of a description about something rather than who you really are. And I'm talking about who we really are as a group. And you can have a family group, you can have a work group, you can have a friend group, you can have multiple different friend groups, and the group identity within each friend group can be slightly different. Or you can have a church group, a local church group, which is what we are. That's what brought us together here today, is our local church group. And again, that's more specifically as to what I want to talk about this morning, but the group identity thing goes beyond just that. I'm just describing the concept of what group identity is and means. So, the group identity that you are part of, whichever part of life it is, let's say it's a friend group, and you get together with your friends. Let's say you have like 3 or 4 golfing buddies, let's say. I wish I did. I don't have any. Me and Preston have tried hard, and we haven't got there yet. Tried to get together to go golfing, but we're too busy, seems like. But anyways, some people talk about having golfing buddies. And so you get to the golf course and you do your round of golf together, and you chat here and there and joke and do this and that and the other thing. And there's probably, if you do this multiple times, where you're actually kind of a group together that operates together in this way a lot, there's going to be certain subjects that come up. There's going to be certain words that you use. There's going to be certain characteristics that come out during that time with that group, as you're together as a group. When you're done golfing with this group of buddies and you go back home and you walk in the door at home with your wife and your family, that group identity there is likely going to be quite different. Not saying one is better or worse than the other, we're not saying necessarily, but it's different. So the dynamic and atmosphere and the group identity at home is probably going to be quite different. Let me start over. A personal experience that I have in this is When I was a boy, I was 9 years old when my parents moved us from Belize up to Canada. I was born in Belize, lived there the first 9 years of my life, and then we moved to Canada. The community we moved to in Canada at first, for the first year and a half there, was a community that was new to all of us as a family. My parents knew a few people, probably maybe 2 couples that they knew up there. I didn't know a soul. And this was a church group, a church community there that we went to. And so we came from Belize, Central America, which is tropical. You can imagine the difference between the people, the culture, the dynamic in Belize, and then being transported over to Canada to an operating community, operating church, local church there. They had church and they had a church school. Immediately when we got there, or pretty much right away within the first few days, there was some kind of event at school. I forget what it was, but something that brought most of the people together. And the few people that knew our family and that knew that we were coming, they had already organized a grocery shower for us. So we were a family of, forget how many were at home then still, but probably 7 kids maybe, plus mom and dad, and maybe even 8, I don't know. But they organized a grocery shower for us one of the first days that we were there. And we were at this event at school, and I remember being floored at how many groceries had been brought together for us. Like there was rows of cardboard boxes with groceries. And we loaded our van up on the way home. I don't even know that we fit everything in. But there was so much food and groceries given to us that was a big first impression. So I say, and then there were of course more things that they did. They were a very friendly, a very welcoming church group in other ways too, helping my dad get a job, helping us find a house, all that kind of stuff. So the identity that we recognized when we came in as outsiders was one of welcome, one of generosity, one of caring for us as strangers. There was also some negative things that I experienced as a boy coming there that surprised me. Just among some of the younger kids that I was with, some of the boys were pretty rough, like I hadn't really ever seen boys be before. So there was that too. It wasn't all perfect, but what I'm trying to describe is there's a group here that lives together and has related together for a long time. They have developed a way of living, a way of interacting with each other, a way of characteristics that they embrace and that they embody and have become. And when somebody comes in, they feel it and they notice it and they experience it. And if we, as we did then, we joined in and we actually went to church there. I went to school. Within a few days of being there, my parents enrolled me in that school, and I went to this brand new school, didn't know anyone, except a few of my brothers and sisters that came too. So, but we became part of that group. And as soon as we're part of that group, we start to do what? We become like them. So they influence us in a lot of ways. Spiritually, they influenced us. Outwardly, they influenced us. The type of clothing they wore started to, for our family, it wasn't very significant. We didn't have a whole lot of money, so we didn't right away go get all kinds of new clothes. But at the same time, stuff like that influenced us. We look at what who we're part of and what they do becomes what we naturally do. The way the group that we're part of thinks, that's how we naturally, instinctively start to think that way too. That influence of the group around us, that group identity tends to become our own identity personally. So when we're a member of a group, in this case we're talking about a church group, a local body, a local church body, how do we want to act? How do we want to be? We are followers of Jesus, right? So when we look at, I guess, at that description, as followers of Jesus, how do followers of Jesus act? What characteristics does a follower of Jesus have? How do we relate to each other if we're followers of Jesus? Questions like that, I think, are good to ask when we consider our group identity. What do we want to portray as followers of Jesus? Where do we look to for guidance on how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to relate, how we're supposed to think? Things like that. We look to Jesus ultimately, right? He's the one, if we're followers of Jesus, then he is the one that dictates how we're supposed to act and live. But the thing is, it's instinctively influenced by how the people around us act. And so there's kind of two dynamics. One is Jesus is our source of identity and how we act. Ultimately, he's the one, right? But he uses the group to help form us and to help bring our own personality, or not personality, but our character, our behavior, to elevate it. God has designed it so that the group around us helps us elevate our life, our standard of living, our character. Our character improvements are largely driven by the group that we're part of. They help elevate us. So then, as a group collectively, let's look to Jesus and make sure that we act as Jesus did and as he would. But then also individually, let's let the group around us elevate our character, elevate our behavior, elevate our attitudes, all that kind of stuff. That's a quick overview, I guess, of what I'm talking about when I'm trying to explain the group identity reality that we live in as people. And just my purpose is just to encourage us, I guess, to recognize that and then in turn do our part to elevate it, to walk closer to what Jesus did and as he did. Let's look at a few verses that help us out of the Bible see how Jesus talks about group identity and how he envisions us to live. First is in 1 Peter 2, verse 9, where Peter writes about God's people. It says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession." This talks about, it's pretty clear, it's God's special people. It's God's holy people. So it's a group, right? It's not just all of creation. No, this is God's people. They're called out. They're holy. They're a special possession. So what does that mean? How do we live that out? Colossians 3:12-14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness. Listen to these words. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. That describes a bit about this chosen, holy, separate people, right? There's a lot in those words. And he caps it all off. He says, above all, love. Love binds it all together in perfect unity. Galatians 5:22-23, very familiar verse. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the fruit of the Spirit. Wow, if we can embrace and live all those words out, what kind of people are we? I think we are that, but I also think we can probably improve. In Ephesians 5, for example, we'll try to make this practical. In Ephesians 5, just looking at that one chapter, which we're not going to read it here, but I'm going to point out some of the things that we can take out of Ephesians 5 and make practical in our life as to who we are, who we as a group want to be. So asking the questions, how do we act as followers of Jesus? Well, we are a people who, verse 2 says, or what we get out of verse 2 of Ephesians 5 is we love each other, just like Christ, because it brings pleasure to God. Verse 3 is we are a people who are careful with our money because it can easily corrupt us. Verse 4 is we are a people who are careful with our words and jokes. Out of verse 10, we can understand that we are a people who diligently find out what pleases God. Verse 11, we are a people who avoid and expose the works of darkness. These are the kind of people we are. Verse 16, we are a people who use our time carefully here on earth. Verse 18, we're a people who don't get drunk, but we are filled with the Spirit. Verse 19, we're a people who sings to each other and make up songs that are uplifting. Verse 20, we're a people who always give thanks to God for everything. That's who we are as Jesus followers. Another chapter out of the Bible, or a couple of chapters, is the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot of description in the Sermon on the Mount as to how Jesus' followers live and who they are in their hearts. Take a few verses there. We're a people who take God's commandments seriously. That's out of verse 19 of Matthew chapter 5. Verse 25, we are people who reconcile to each other as quickly as possible. Verse 28, we are people who are careful to obey God in our sexuality, even with glances and thoughts. Verse 32, we are a people who remain faithful to our spouses. Verse 37, we are people who keep our word and therefore have no need to make oaths. Are we people like this? Verse 44, we are a people who love our enemies and pray for them. Chapter 6, verse 4 is we're a people who seek God's reward instead of other men. Verse 14 of chapter 6 is, we're a people who forgive others because we have been forgiven so much by God. These are characteristics that we are as followers of Jesus. This is who Jesus says we as his children are. So do we let him identify who we are, or do we let our own feelings and our own weaknesses, or what somebody else says about us, or about what Satan whispers in our ear, tell us who we are? Who are we? Who are we as God's people? There's a big difference, I think, in whether we are something and we embrace something deep inside us as who we are, rather than that we look at something and just want to make sure that we do it that way. For example, the Sermon on the Mount. Somebody which is kind of easy to do, is to look at that as a list of rules. And we want to make sure that we do them. Or even the 10 Commandments, take that as a list of rules. Let's make sure that we do them. And if we mess up, then, oh no, I messed up. I didn't tell the truth. I lied, so I need to next time tell the truth. I've got to try harder next time. Where we try to do things and follow these rules by our own conscious decision and by our own willpower, rather than the other side is to recognize that this is actually who I am, and to receive it, and like in a purposeful and a welcoming, and just let it absorb deep into our hearts. This is who I am. And then as we absorb it into ourselves, also encourage the people around us in that way, and keep inspiring each other to be who we really are in our hearts. And then when that's really inside us and we start acting it out from a perspective of this is who I am, then we can transition over from just trying harder to actually it just becomes instinctive. If we act out of who we are, then it's instinctive. Then we do it without thinking. So I think that's a big difference, which way we live our life. Do we live our life just by always trying hard to do all the right things? Or do we embrace God and who he is and who we as his people are, internalize it and receive it through multiple ways, but basically that it becomes ourselves, and then just live it out of ourselves. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he talks about that a good fruit or a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. That's what he's talking about. Because a bad tree is a bad tree. It's not a good tree that bears bad fruit. It is in itself, whatever makes that tree bad is it's in itself, it's a bad tree. It's not something that you put on it, it's what it is. And therefore it's impossible to bear good fruit if your inside isn't good. If your inside isn't changed by Jesus. You know what I mean? So this also relates back to what I've talked about earlier about logical and like the right brain, left brain thing. If we constantly just look at how we act and what we do as a logical thing that I want to make sure I do everything right and logicalize it all, we're going to tend to fail a lot more than if we embrace it through our identity and let the Holy Spirit touch us in our hearts and give us an identity that identifies with the way Jesus walks, with the commandments that Jesus gave, and have it in our heart as our own identity. So the group identity together then has a big effect on our ability to change our character. If us as a group, if we operate in the true love for each other and connection for each other and with Christ, and we live in the joy of the Lord, then we will have the ability to influence each other and lift us all collectively up. We also have the power within us to drag the whole body down by being careless and by forgetting who we are. Then we also have a negative effect, and we bring the whole group down or the whole group up, individually and collectively. It's kind of beautiful how that works together. It's back again also like a body, how the body is has individual members and gifts and purposes, but it's all collectively one body, so you can't really separate the two. So some ways that help improve our group identity and that contribute to togetherness is age groups, or lessening age group differences. It's very common to do things by age group. The younger ones are here, and the middle, like even our Sunday school is that way. Which it's not. I'm not saying it's all bad, but just talking about the tendency. You have young ones doing this. You have the next age here, and then you have the young men here, and you have the middle-aged people, and then the old. Like they operate a lot in their own age group or in their own maturity level. If we operate too much like that, then we start to lose the benefit that we would have by relating all together, where the younger ones can see how the older ones handle life, where they can learn from where the more immature ones can learn from the more mature ones, those who have experienced life longer, who have grown in their emotions and in their spiritual life in whatever way. There's a lot of value that the younger ones can learn from the older ones. And it's not even just age. It's not just one way. Us older ones, if I can throw myself in there, learn from the younger ones too. Like I've been inspired by being part of the volleyball team and the softball team. It encourages me, it lifts up, like we use the term, it keeps us young. That's a group identity thing when we say it keeps us young. The influence of the younger ones and their exuberance, their energy, their passion to do well in a volleyball game or whatever, that passion, it helps me be passionate. It helps me care about being active. So it goes both ways. The group helps us become better. But that separation of creating groups in our life of just our age group or our like-minded group or whatever, and not relating that much with other groups outside of our own comfort level, that is a hindrance and something that society has promoted by separating things so much by now. So I think we can be purposeful by trying to connect with people who aren't in our immediate age group or our interest group or whatever, where we learn from others in that way. Consider a child growing up. How much of what that child learns and how much of what character that child gets and develops over time, how much of it is influenced by observing their parents and how they handle things. We get the ultimate source of how we're supposed to live comes from the Bible and from God. But He uses people. And in a child's life, the parents are so instrumental. And so much of what a child develops into and what characteristics they have, or their values and their characteristics and the way they behave and respond to things, comes from them observing their parents or in church, other older people. So, like simple things like when a policeman stops me on the highway and comes and talks to me at the window and I've been speeding or whatever, and my child is in there with me in the car, they're learning how to act when this happens to them. Even though they may not think of it, I may not think of it, and all of that, but when their turn comes, they're instinctively going to do what they saw us do. Or if a friend mistreats me, disappoints me in some way or hurts me or offends me, my child watches me. How am I going to respond? How am I going to relate back to that friend? And they learn. That's group identity. That's group influence on each other. If I'm at a restaurant and the food that I ordered comes and it's a little different than I ordered, how do I respond? The kids are going to watch and they're going to learn. Oh, that's how we respond. Okay. Or just there's limitless ways like that where we're influencing the people around us. Are we influencing people around us up towards the light and to become more like Jesus, or less? It matters. It really does. And if you're a younger person, are you willing to learn from the older ones? Most of our younger ones are upstairs now, so they're learning there. But it's also that side. Are we humble? Are we willing to look to someone else for an example and follow if it seems like that is the right way, even though I prefer a different way? But if that is the right way, are we willing to follow somebody else's example that's set before us? It takes commitment and intentionality for us to keep lifting us up collectively. We are human and are quick to forget. We're quick to forget who we really are, and we slip into humanity. We're quick to slip into responding not like Christ, rather than like Christ. So it takes commitment and intentionality to encourage each other, to encourage ourselves, to keep us accountable, to keep lifting us up, especially by leaders. And some of you may think you're exempt if I say especially by leaders, but you're actually all leaders. We all lead someone. And so whether we're elders in the church, whether we're parents, whether we're leaders at work, whether we're mothers, whether we're older children, younger children, we all are leading people. There's people that look at us and see how we act, and then they act likewise. So that influence is there. So who are we? Who are you? Who am I? Really, deep inside, who are we? Are we acting like we really are? Like God calls us? As He identifies us? As a group and individually? Are we acting out and living out? And our attitudes and all of that, do we reflect what we really are as followers of Jesus in our hearts? Let's seek the Scriptures and let the Holy Spirit guide us into all truth about who we really are, individually, but also as a group. Then let's live it out enthusiastically and with courage. Let's encourage each other. Let's be bold. Let's be clear and not shy with following God's ways and with encouraging each other towards God's ways. Let's walk in joy in the Lord's presence and in each other's presence. Be happy to see each other. Let love cover a multitude of sins. There's a verse that describes love as covering a multitude of sins. That's what true love does. We forgive quickly. We don't hold things against people. Be who you are and be willing to change who you are as you absorb the character of Jesus deep into your heart. Then as you have more and more of Jesus' ways deep in your heart, then you can live it out instinctively rather than constantly having to force it by trying hard and failing and trying hard again and failing. No, let's live from the heart. Let's let the light of Jesus and His ways into our hearts and just live it out, just let it out. And if where we're imperfect, let's be humble, repent, and soak in God's ways into that spot. Whatever God actually says is right, like where I failed, let's let God's truth and what He says we are go into that place where that failure came from. And then next time, or as we grow in it, it's not always this time and that time, but as we grow in it, then we will become instinctively, we can respond differently. Where you can have a person who instinctively gets extremely angry and lashes out when something goes wrong, to that same person instinctively acting with grace, controlling himself. So it's a beautiful thing to see transformation and to see growth in myself and my children and people around us. God's kingdom is all about bringing people from darkness to light. And for that to truly happen, it happens in the heart first. So that's all I have. Let's be encouraged. I'm excited to see God in each one of you and to be part of a group that inspires me to be better, inspires me to be more like Jesus. So thank you for that, and bless you as you keep going.